Welcoming lots of people back this afternoon, actually. Obviously, primary one is my interviewee, my fireside chat, my non-existent fireside. I did think we were going to get a little screen, actually, with a fire on it, but you have to imagine. Our wonderful interviewee, Bill Dutton, whom we'll talk more about in a moment. But you'll have also noticed some other unfamiliar faces around, perhaps, for our new students, which is some of our wonderful alumni have come back. Even though you knew Bill and you've met him before and you know all about him, you still come back to meet him again and hopefully come out for dinner and drinks with us after, which is really, really wonderful. So welcome to all of you. As you can see, we have a cameraman, wonderful Adam standing at the back. We're recording the interview discussion with Bill. It'll probably still be running during the Q&A. We don't usually put that up online, but if for any reason you're worried about that, you're asking a question that's particularly sensitive, feel free to just say, please can you not record this bit or keep it, and then that'll be an obvious marker for us not to do so. And we will run for about, it's an hour and a half, isn't it, I think, Jenny? So till about 6:30, and then there'll be, what, drinks? Drinks outside, there you go.
Very good.
So, Bill Dutton is the man who's responsible for me still being here at OII, who was my first director here. He inculcated for me an immense love of everything that we do here, a huge respect for the faculty who research this, and it's a real honour actually to have you back and to be able to grill you intensely over the next 3/4 of an hour. Now, many of our students here today, you've got some old faces and some new faces, but certainly for those just starting out on their graduate degrees, they're still sort of trying to work out what they're going to do over the next year, what courses they're doing, why they're doing them. And I just wondered, can you think back that far to when you started out? Because you started out in political science, didn't you?
Oh, yes.
What drove you to that? Why that?
As an undergraduate, I did very well in political science. So I followed my abilities, I guess, but I moved away from political science because I got involved in a project looking at the implications of computing and telecommunications, and this was in 1974, before some of you were really studying.
Even born.
And yes, and we were looking at the role of computing in urban government, and the reason I was brought on is partly a methodologist, but partly because I looked at urban politics, and I became increasingly much more interested in the political implications of computing and telecommunications than I did in traditional subjects around politics. In fact, my political scientist colleagues would say that's not political science, and the studies of computing and telecommunications were something about administration or having to do with management, but maybe computer science, but not political science. But anyway, I followed my own star and decided to pursue what I was interested in that time was the power shifts that might be connected with the computerization of organizations, and that's what I pursue that to this day. I followed that stream of work throughout my career, how the technological change in organizations, communities, and society may reconfigure the relative communicative power of different actors, and that's what's behind my notion of the Fifth Estate in a way. But it's the most contemporary version of that argument. So political science was a stopping point. I only worked, I taught a statistics course in political science at SUNY Buffalo, and then I taught 1 year in a department of political science. My first job, University of South Florida. I almost didn't remember the name of it. It's so long ago. But I've been in so many other departments, but really, I don't think any political scientist would say that I'm a card-carrying member of.
No, but I mean, the focus on politics and government has been a consistent theme throughout your work, and actually I would like to talk more specifically about the Fifth Estate later on. Okay. I mean, just to go back to those very early years, you also, am I right in thinking you also did a congressional internship at one point, I remember seeing on your CV. Did you ever think about doing politics as a career, or were you always a card-carrying academic?
Oh, no. Oh, yeah, of course. This is embarrassing, but I was...
Excellent.
No, I was an undergraduate, and I went to Washington and gosh, I was there during the March on Washington and everything. I mean, this was really incredible times, 1964, and I was an intern for Congressman McCarthy, not Eugene McCarthy, but I worked on Eugene McCarthy's campaign in Washington, D.C. at that time, and I was I had a buddy who was investment person, and he was going to raise money for me, and I was going to run for office in Kansas City, Missouri. I was going to go to law school, and therefore and that was another reason I went into political science. I was going to go to law school, but I got more interested in political science than law.
See, there you go. I've known you all this time, and I didn't know that fact. So this is very good to have this conversation.
Yeah.
You mentioned just now that the sort of the first project that took you down the route of looking at uses of digital technology in society was this one on sort of wired cities.
Yes.
I mean, that's something we're still applying for research grants on. You did another one, didn't you? I think on the future of teleconferencing or the impact of that. Yeah. Now, presumably, we still think of these as cutting edge research, but presumably it pretty darn was cutting edge then, wasn't it? How new was this? Was it a very recent field with these very untrodden paths?
Well, it was old and new because there was other work on wired cities. Mm-hmm. I mean, Ralph Lee Smith wrote a beautiful book called the Wired Nation, and back in the early 70s. He later described it as a optimistic dissertation proposal or something. He thought it was quite utopian, but it inspired many people to think that cable television would usher in a public information utility, and so there were visions really very early on of the notion of a this was a time when it was you were known as a blue sky thinker if you thought that we needed computers in the households at all, right? It's never going to be in the 1970s. People thought that the idea of having a computer in the household, you'd have photographs of a furnace in the basement and then a big mainframe computer in the basement, and this was the idea of computers, and it was going to be a public information utility, and these were just silly dreams of computer scientists and so forth. But it's I mean, can you imagine them? Imagine that the normal household today has 3 or more computers, many of which are mobile and more in their hand than what would be in that basement mainframe. So, but when Ralph Lee Smith, the earliest version of that was the interactive cable television, and the whole invention of cable was I think, really started to develop the notion of a wired nation, and of course it was surpassed by the PC and bulletin boards and then the internet. But the vision of what we have today is actually very old, and it's but the nation, like even we know that the Oxford Martin Institute, James Martin wrote about wired communities, wired cities. Did one of the classic books on that. And what we did in the early 80s is we tried to look empirically at what actually was happening in cities. So we compared 5 countries and cities, wired cities in 5 different nations, and actually the difficulties that there were and the problems in trying to innovate in that area and the potential implications of those. So we did some of the very first actual empirical work about what actually happens when people try to push technological innovation in this way in the community.
Can you reflect at all on sort of what we've learned over that period of time, and we still have aspirations for what internet technologies will deliver, for example, say for cities? Mm-hmm. Do you think that in the intervening period, the expectations that governments had at that point when they put these technologies in, do you think those have been delivered? Do you think that, did your empirical results at the time show that aspirations were being met, or do you think we're always permanently trying to sort of catch up with expectation?
Well, I think for example, the mini in Japan and Higashiyama and Tama Newtown in Japan, they tried to experiment with trying to enhance a sense of community through a wired city, so that if people actually got more information, more community-oriented information. And it was very, very difficult to do it then, and we're still fighting that issue now. So there's still that struggle for community-oriented media that's high quality, and that actually they found no evidence at all that it would have a positive effect on a sense of community. So that was, you know, sobering. And then also we found that, you know, when everybody experimented with e-democracy, you know, it was called, e-democracy is not that new. It was kind of, you know, the idea of people voting on interactive cable television. I mean, this was, so we actually looked at the very first council meeting ever, Cablecast. We studied it and found that when, well, I don't want to go into the study design, but we found that basically cable decreased the amount of controversy that went on at a council meeting. And it was very interesting stuff. But when we studied Cube and other interactive cable projects to see to what degree you could engage citizens in more interactive democratic polling and voting and from the home on the city plans and so forth. And we knew then that politicians did not like voting and polling from homes, and nor political scientists. It was viewed as too dangerous, too worrisome, and also too few people were engaged. And that's actually always influenced me, because the idea of a fifth estate is not based on reforming governmental institutions. It's creating a new organizational form that complements governmental institutions. And I think the idea of, well, I don't want to go into all the reasons, but I think that you know them, but the problem of actually reconfiguring the way governments work is another task altogether. And I think that so much of the work on democracy and technology is focused on somehow using technology to revolutionize the way governments work. And that's been, I think, a wrong direction. And I think that's going to happen much more incrementally. But there's been dramatic things that have happened in the way people get engaged in politics outside of government. Just as, well, Rebecca's here, just as in education, reforming educational institution is a long slog, but people in informal learning, dramatic, huge strides in the reconfiguring the way people learn over the internet and use the internet for learning and education outside of formal institutional structures. So very similar kind of thing.
If you look back at the way then sort of scholarship in this area has developed over, you know, the last sort of 40 odd years or so, do you think, are we still fundamentally asking the same questions but just of different technologies? I mean, you know, when you were here most recently, we were working on Internet of Things and smart cities and so on, which is maybe different from, you know, basic uses of technology in government back in the 1970s. But, you know, is it fundamentally those same questions you mentioned just now? I mean, I sometimes think it is. Do you agree? It is.
It is. I mean, please disagree with me, guys, if you don't. But I think, for example, I was just involved in this project on, you know, collective intelligence, using collective intelligence in urban areas and across Europe, and Oxford is one of the cities, and I'd love to, I can't wait to hear how the project's going. But again, it was the same idea that members of the city council and politicians are saying, wow, if we can tap what people are thinking on Twitter and saying about the city on Twitter, we can inform decision making in the city and so forth. It's very, very similar. It's just different technologies. I mean, we were modeling in simulation and the use of big data to tease out information that would inform policy making is a new technology, but the idea is very enduring. I mean, we studied in late 70s, early 80s, I studied some of the first computer models used to inform city government decision making. And we were looking at the politics of modeling in cities, and it's very similar to the politics of big data in cities in a sense.
Yeah. Do you think that should encourage us in a way that, you know, we have been here before, we do have the right theoretical frameworks, the right ways of addressing these things, or do you think actually it's just a bit depressing that we keep going back to the same? Yeah. I mean, it's social scientists are asking this question, I suppose, all the time. You know, it's nobody listening to us, but.
No, because things change. I mean, I think the worst thing, some people, luckily, there are always new people infused in the field, and also people, let me give you a case like a video telephony. Video phone was always slammed as never going to happen, never going to happen. And every 2 years, people would introduce another video phone or another video conferencing system. And I studied video conferencing in 1980 and AT&T's picture phone meeting service and things like that. And they would always fail. And people would say, well, it's never going to happen. And some people absolutely have just written it off. But luckily, other people just don't even, I called it innovation amnesia. And they come in from different companies and from different business sectors, and they say, oh, wow, well, people like to communicate on the phone. What if they could see each other? And, and so they reinvent this all the time. But my God, now video, it worked. And so it's like by a process of hit and miss and new people coming in and the technology changing, some things that we thought were impossible before all of a sudden become possible. So I think time and again, there are areas where, take video text, and everybody looked at video text and said, well, it just doesn't work to put news online, right? And now the news online is absolutely a huge, huge issue. So I think the same new technologies actually make things, they do change the context, the possibilities, and they also, but the ideas are not, surely they're new ideas. They're more informed people, more informed voters, more engaged voters, more people who are more connected to their community. Why should those ideas change? Those are enduring issues, and I think so luckily, there are new people and new technologies that actually keep that going.
You're not a determinist, though, are you? I mean, you've always been very careful to frame this in the context of, reconfiguring access is the phrase that you often use. So how do you perceive the relationship between technologies and individuals and institutions?
Well, right. Yes, I'm not. I don't want to. I almost don't want to say that because it's been such a mantra. Everybody prefaces their remarks by saying I'm not a technological determinist, and I always get accused of being something like that. But because you study technology, because I do think technology matters. All I'm saying is that if you think any technology, any communication technology reconfigures how you get information, how you communicate with people. Think of the internet, but also the outcome of those activities. So what you know, who you know, what services you access are reconfigured by the fact that you're using the internet rather than, say, the telephone or rather than going to visit somebody. So these are immense changes if it changes what you know and who you know and what services you obtain. So the problem is you can't necessarily predict that this is going to have an overwhelmingly democratic or technocratic. And some of the very first contribution I think I made to the study of politics and computing was this concept of reinforcement politics, where we found that in organizations that were very centralized, computing tended to be adopted and implemented in ways that reinforce the centralization of that organization. And in more pluralistic, decentralized cities and organizations, computing was adopted and reinforced that actually followed and reinforced that more pluralistic, democratic structure of government. And I was sort of preaching reinforcement politics, which is the social shaping of technology. It depends on the existing, who has influence to choose what technologies you choose, how you implement them. That reinforcement politics notion carried the day for a long time for me until I started thinking more seriously about the internet. And when I just concluded that I think Morozov and other people are wrong because they think that somebody can control this technology. And I think it's become out of anyone's control, so that out of any one powers, any one power to be, so that there's no monopoly of control over the internet. Users and multiple users and across the globe, and multiple companies and all sorts of surprising developments mean that no single authority is shaping the internet in a way that can reinforce their power. And so I think reinforcement politics I've put to bed, and I think that Morozov, that's his notion, that it's a reinforcement politics perspective. And I'm the first person to say I think he's wrong, because he expects that some country, any country in the world, can actually basically control the use of the internet. And I think it's beyond any nation, any autocratic authority's control to do so. So that's, but that's again social shaping, because the technology reconfigures who can shape what and when, the circumstances under which people can shape control.
While we're talking about the intellectual contributions you've made, which are, so incredibly many over, your career, the number of awards that you've won, obviously, scholarship awards, honours you've been given, they really recognise that. Maybe let's move on then to the Fifth Estate, which you mentioned earlier. I mean, it's the sort of innovation that I'm, sort of particularly familiar with. It was the work that you were doing over the last couple of years. But again, people here may not be completely familiar with that. I mean, could you explain, beyond the title of a rather bad film, what is the Fifth Estate?
Well,
and did you get any royalties for that? You didn't.
Did I ever tell you about the film? Anyway, this is an aside. I'm sorry if I bored you. If I bored, but it's sort of funny. I was in Austria talking about the Fifth Estate, and I think it was 2011, and this was after WikiLeaks, and Domsteck Berg, who was the guy in WikiLeaks who was the outcast because he was accused of by the founder of WikiLeaks to be a CIA agent or an FBI agent, and his girlfriend was also accused of being an FBI or CIA agent. And he was ousted from WikiLeaks, and he was anyway. He was in Austria too, and I met him in a hot tub. So we were. So my wife and I were in a hot tub, and Domsteck Berg and his girlfriend were in the hot tub. And
academic life, guys.
And it was a beautiful hotel in Alpbach, Austria, and and he's speaking about WikiLeaks, of course, and I'm saying, oh well, I'm speaking about the Fifth Estate, and I think WikiLeaks is actually a great example of Fifth Estate kind of strategy of leaking and distributing online and so forth. And he said, yeah, that's a really good idea and everything. Anyway, he was the author of it was his his book that led to the movie The Fifth Estate. And if I ever see him again, I'm going to ask for royalties.
Absolutely, absolutely deserved.
But I'm sure he stole that. But good, that's great. But it's.
It should be one of our impact cases for the ref, I think, next time. Yeah.
But the WikiLeaks is an example. But there's. But it's a very simple idea, which is that the internet enables people, networked individuals, to source their own material and to source their own networks, to configure their own information and their own networks in ways that enhance their communicative power relative to other non-networked actors and also institutions. It doesn't mean that networked individuals are more powerful than institution, or that individualism and libertarianism rules all. It means that networked individuals are relatively more powerful today than they would have been in a previous day, both through leaking, but also sourcing information, by distributing information, by use of collective intelligence and so forth, in ways that are independent of any single existing institution. So that and this actually came out of the Oxus research. It very much was an inductivist conclusion, because you could see when you analyze the Oxus data that you could see over trends from 2003 to 2013. You could see that increasingly people are not going to any particular place for information. They're going to the internet for information. And not only are they going to the internet for information, that means they're going to a space of flows rather than a space of places. They're going where a search engine tells them. So they're not going to saying, I want to go to the OII to find out anything. I want to go to find out who knows about a particular piece of information. So they are divorcing their sourcing of information from particular traditional institutions in their local environment. And that opens up the possibility of them having an independent view, a relatively independent view, and also being able to distribute that information to the world. So it's not that different from the press in an earlier era. So 18th century England, the idea that there was a fourth estate of the press is, I think in the 21st century, the fifth estate is the equivalent development. And anyway, fleshing that out is, I'm still doing that. I'm talking about it a lot of places, and I keep saying I'm writing a book about it, but I've been talking too much and not writing, as so many of you probably do. But anyway, I will do it. I will do it.
We'll hold you to that, definitely.
Yeah.
Maybe let's turn now to not so much as the academic research that you've carried out, but the institution building. And obviously, you've now had a really significant track record. I mean, not just with the OII. Before then, you were a leader, weren't you, of PICT, which is the Programme for Information and Communication Technologies, big one in the UK. Obviously, now you're at the Quello Center. So you've got, I think, a really unusual perspective on research centres in this field. How would you say the role of these sort of research centres has changed over your career? I mean, are they still needed? Are they needed more than ever? You know, has the focus changed?
Oh, yeah, that's a really good question. Well, I don't know. I enjoy, well, you know, we all want to have an impact on the field, and we want to change the way people think about our subject matter. And so there's only so much you can do by yourself. So I try to promote the idea of a fifth estate and explain what it is, and I think if people know that, then they might actually make different decisions, or they might understand things in different ways. But there's only a limited impact that any individual can have as an academic, I think. Probably at Oxford it might be different. Somebody told me that Oxford had some of the strongest centers in every area in the world, but they're always one person deep. And I don't know whether that's the traditional Oxford, but I think more and more Oxford is moving towards getting some scale in different areas, and I think, golly, the OII is a tremendous example of that, where you have, I think, something in the neighborhood of 40 faculty researchers.
That's right.
Okay?
Yeah.
And when I started, I was, one faculty member.
You and me and a couple of visitors, yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of smoke and mirrors. And so the impact, the impact of the OII now is really, the potential is tremendous. And so you can't do that with, and I think that everybody, we're not, it's a department, it's not a single project or anything, but I think there's a team quality to the OII, where there is a sense in which it's not a normal department where everybody is just doing their own thing. I think people that, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that there's enough of an identity to the OII and a focus to the OII and this concept of its origins around the social implications of the internet, and also its anchoring in the social sciences, which makes it truly unique globally. There is no other center comparable center that is really anchored in the social sciences. You guys that are new doctoral students probably can tell me if there is another, but I think that there isn't, and that gives us a strategic focus that's really quite different. But it's that scale that the OII has achieved can make a huge difference. And I don't think there's any more important technology than the internet. some of my colleagues in the U.S. think that the internet is old hat. You know, I think they still think the internet is dialing up on a modem with your PC, and that they don't understand the internet as we do, in a very very broad way, in which everything, most of what we do is big data and Internet of Things and collective intelligence is everything's becoming more and more connected, not less. And so the social implications of the internet are immense, and for no individual. In fact, the best example of this is that at the Annenberg School for Communication, I just beating my head against the wall for years to try to set up an institute or a unit that would try to look at the social implications of the networked telecommunications and so forth, and I was so frustrated with it. I started looking elsewhere, and was about ready to accept a position at another university when I got a call to come and talk to these folks at Oxford. And I immediately saw that, oh wow, this is exactly what should be done. The founders of the OII were brilliant, and they put together something that I couldn't put together at the Annenberg School, because they thought it was computer science. That this is not something social science. If you want to do that, Bill, go over and talk to the guys in engineering. And said, no, this is very much a social issue. And so OII was very much in the forefront there. Yeah.
And I mean, given your great track record, obviously, of institution building here, what are you doing at Quello? Am I right in thinking it had a bigger history in telecommunications policy, for example? So where are you taking that over the next 5 years? You have to give the official version because BB's sitting here, so no secrets. Yeah.
Bianca Reisdorf is a doctoral student that graduated from here. I don't know if you should definitely meet her, because she's. We hired her at the Quello Center, so we've hired some of our talented doctoral students from OII, and which reminds me of Elizabeth Dubois is in the back, and she just graduated today, right? You just defended your dissertation. Yeah. Anyway, I'm so proud of the students that come out of this place. And anyway, I take credit for all of you guys.
Absolutely. So you should.
And but what was the question?
I don't know, but that was a more interesting answer.
Actually. The Quello Center.
The Quello Center, yeah. So where are you pushing that over the next few years?
Well, the Quello Center was very interesting because it was founded in the late 1990s, sort of before people understood what the founders of the OII did, which was that the internet was going to be this big, and it was much more anchored in the era of telecommunications regulation, of big telephone companies and cable and broadcasting and so forth. And Quello himself was a broadcaster that became one of the longest serving commissioners of the FCC ever, and one of the longest serving commissioners in any commission in Washington. He was like 25 years. And anyway, the center was put together to look at the impact of telecommunication policy in the industry and technological change. And my mission is, which I've told my colleagues, is to bring the Quello Center into the digital age. So I'm very much the OII as an inspiration for what I am doing there in terms of trying to bring that up to speed. But I think also, and it's not just because I'm at the Quello Center, I was also drawn to it because I think that there's a big shift going on in internet studies. And I think that the primary shift is from, I think the central narrative from 2000 to now has always been around technical change and related industry change. You know, the big news is, any kind of thing with Bitcoin, or it's all the next technology, Internet of Things, and so forth, and rightfully so. And this will continue, but my argument would be is that over the next decade, I think the narrative is going to be much more focused on policy and regulation. And this is not necessarily good news, but I think we have, all of us at the OII and any center seriously interested in the internet and have to be more focused on policy and regulation. I mean, you have this surveillance bill that's being discussed in Britain. You have similar bills being discussed around the world, and net neutrality regulation in the US, which makes the internet much more subject to all sorts of regulation as almost a telephone carrier. So I think we, in our excitement over the technology of the internet, and under the umbrella of where we thought the internet was an unregulated or light regulatory regime, we've forgotten about really trying to think through the issues of internet regulation and governance. So we have no model that appropriately applies to the internet, and I think it's I think this is going to be a real problem, because what we're politicians, as you know, I mean, there's another change that's going on, and you know about this as well as I do, is when I was first here, everybody was just so optimistic and excited about the internet. This is just nothing but good news. And then now, it's hard to find anybody that doesn't think the internet is catastrophic for children, for terrorism, for the dark side rather than the bright side of the internet has become dominant. And in that context, people are going to politicians and regulators and say, do something. And they feel pressured to do something. And what can we tell them to do? And so we don't really have good models to provide them. And therefore, they apply old models to different aspects of the internet. So I think it's probably not an appropriate analogy, but I use it anyway. The idea of the old Indian parable of the blind man and the elephant, where people find different parts of the internet that seem like telephone services, and this seems like broadcasting, and this. So we're applying different models to different aspects of the internet, and the summation of this is going to be a highly regulated internet based on inappropriate models. You see the evidence, symptoms of this when people are arrested for a single tweet in Britain. Or, so I mean, there are a number of areas where I think we have a real risk of not over-regulating or under-regulating, but inappropriately regulating the internet, because academics and others are not providing a model that is appropriate to this new technology, I think. So that was a long-winded way of saying I think the Quello Center, I think, is going to try to get in front of this focus on policy and regulation, where I think that will be so determinative of the vitality of the internet in the next 10 years. So it won't just be a technical narrative or an industrial narrative.
Such a really great response. You've actually just predicted my last two questions. In fact, the last one was, are there any major threats on the horizon in relation to the internet? So you've just answered that. So I'm afraid I think we need to stop. Maybe we should get you started on the book and ask you to come back again in a year's time for the next advisory board and do a seminar on the draft. How about that? Would that help? I don't know.
Well, if I could just say that I really want to thank you for inviting me to come and talk. I've only been gone a year, so it's wonderful to reminisce. But I, being away from Oxford and coming back, and it just reminds me of how special Planet Oxford is. I mean, it is absolutely, the academic culture here is there's no place else in the world that you can find as positive and as great an academic culture in terms of being able to assemble all of you here tonight, and that you're willing to hear how many, there probably are 20 seminars going on in Oxford today. So you'll never experience something like this ever before. And also the brilliance of the founders to do such work, and to found the OII, and for me to see so many new faces here. It's just inspiring. So anyway, I just want to thank you and thank the staff of the OII and all of my old faculty colleagues, and Helen and everything for keeping this ship thriving. It was just amazing. But for me, I mean, I always thought that this is the highlight of my career, but my current metaphor is that, you know, being at the OII was my sort of magic carpet. And it just really enabled me to do things that I never would have ever been able to do as an academic, and I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Well, what can I say?